What is the most important part of every story? Is it the climax, when all the threads of the story come together in one explosive finale? Is it the moments of progression that happen along the way that complicate the story and develop the characters and present interesting action and obstacles for your characters to engage? Those things are all really, really important, and getting them right matters a lot. But in my opinion, the most important part of every story is the inciting incident that happens towards the beginning of the story and sets the stage for everything that's going to follow after it. The inciting incident is so important because it's the moment in the story that means we have a story in the first place. Prior to the inciting incident, your characters are more or less just living their lives, whether that's something we see on the page or whether it's something that's implied as having happened before. There's always something that came before the story started. So what started the story? Well, the inciting incident is the moment in your story when some kind of significant change occurs. When a problem arises or an obstacle or a challenge is presented that disrupts your protagonist's life significantly enough to force them out of their normal and into the world of the story. Now, the inciting incident looks really different across different genres and styles. In a war epic, it might be the moment when the protagonist is drafted to the army for the first time. In a romance, it's the moment when the two love interests meet and sparks fly. In a legal thriller, it might be the moment when the lawyer takes a case that she knows she probably shouldn't, but she can't help but say yes to. Whatever the case, it's the moment in a story when something significant changes for your protagonist, usually in ways that are larger than even they realize and that carry larger implications than they're prepared for. But the inciting incident needs to be large enough and substantial enough to set your characters off on a journey that will change and transform them towards the resolution of the story. What resolution, you might ask? Well, the inciting incident comes into play there as well, because the inciting incident is also the moment when the story question is posed for the first time. In simple terms, the story question is the unresolved element that your story is all about, and it really can be boiled down to a simple question, like, can Katniss survive the Hunger Games? Will a small-town sheriff be able to stop a ravenous shark from eating everyone on the beach? Will these two flawed characters be able to overcome their differences in time to find true love? The simple question that is posed by the inciting incident, now disrupting life and leaving it as an open, unresolved question, gives you the framework for what your story is exploring and investigating as the external track. Now, the thematic argument of your story is a whole other conversation, which we can have another time. But at least in terms of the external plot, your story isn't finished until your reader gets a definitive answer to that question. Typically, the answer comes in the climax of the story. So by making sure that your inciting incident is well structured, is interesting, is unique, is compelling, and does a really good job of setting up the story question in a clear and intuitively understandable way for your reader, you set your whole story up on a very strong foundation, because then you can play out the exploration of that question through a series of increasingly difficult obstacles and rising stakes and mounting tension and growing conflict that keeps your reader more and more and more and more engaged in the events of the story and what is going to happen to these characters we become invested in as we watch them struggle to answer the story question that was posed back in the inciting incident. So as you're working on the outline for your story, take some time to figure out what your story question really is. What is your story about? What is the open loop that until it is resolved, your story is not yet finished? And then think about where that question is raised for the first time in your story. Spend some time making that scene or that series of moments as interesting and as compelling as you can make them to be. Don't just breeze over it, but focus on structuring that extremely clearly and well, because that inciting incident will become the fuel that drives your story forward all the way to the climax when you finally relieve us of our tension by answering your story question once and for all. Of course, the inciting incident is just one of the many critical elements of a great story structure, and if you'd like to learn more about the entire arc of a good narrative structure and all of the story beats that go into that process, then you'll find a link in the description of this video to the Skillshare class that I've created all about narrative structure, and I think you'll find it really, really helpful to see how the inciting incident relates to the complete picture and all the different elements that make up a great story.